Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from the front page of the Delhi edition. This article highlights the outcomes of the India-US 2+2 dialogue that was held yesterday. This 2+2 dialogue between India and US is held at the ministerial level involving the Defense Minister and Foreign Minister of India and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense of the United States. At this third edition of the 2+2 dialogue, the United States has said that it will support India to defend its territorial sovereignty and liberty against any external threats. This is basically an indirect reference to India's ongoing border tensions and border dispute with China. The outcomes of the 2+2 dialogue clearly shows that there is a high degree of convergence between the political leadership and the military leadership of the two countries, leading to greater convergence in their national security interests. In fact, the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, has directly flagged the Chinese Communist Party as a threat to the interests of democratic countries around the world. These statements from the United States are quite interesting, considering the ongoing tensions between India and China. Even as the standoff in the Ladakh region between India and China continues, the United States has repeatedly labeled the Chinese Communist Party as a global threat, and it has extended support to India's defense of its territorial sovereignty and liberty. But it is still not clear as to what exactly this support entails. Because of course, India can't be naive enough to expect the United States to get into a conflict with China if there is a future conflict between India and China. It is highly unlikely that the United States would become a party to such a conflict. But however, this promised support by the United States could be in the form of intelligence sharing, diplomatic support, sale of essential defense equipment to the Indian Armed Forces, and a joint collaboration between India and US in order to ensure that China respects a rules-based order. Be it the Indo-Pacific region or the line of actual control between India and China, China has consistently disrespected international law, and it has willingly gone against the rules-based world order. Take for example how China has disrupted the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, which is a part of the Indo-Pacific region, and hence it has become a top priority for the United States to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. So the outcomes of the 2+2 dialogue makes it very clear that in case of China's hostility and aggression against India, the United States would extend limited support to India in the form of intelligence sharing, sale of essential defense equipment, and exertion of diplomatic pressure on China. And at the global level, with regard to China's aggression in the South China Sea and in the Indo-Pacific region, there will be joint collaboration between India and the US in the form of the Quadrilateral and other military exercises such as the Malabar, in order to ensure that China abides by a rules-based world order with utmost respect for international law. At the 2+2 dialogue, both India and US have expressed complete support to freedom of navigation in the South China Sea and the establishment of a free and open Indo-Pacific according to the norms laid out by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So in the context of maintaining the Indo-Pacific region free and open for navigation, India and US have emphasized on the need for a code of conduct in the South China Sea. They expect that such a code of conduct can enforce a rules-based order on China. Then interestingly, both India and US have agreed to jointly collaborate for running capacity building programs in partner countries in the Indo-Pacific region. Any such capacity building program is likely to focus on those countries in the Indo-Pacific that are friendly towards both India and US, such as Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, etc. All these partner countries in the Indo-Pacific region, they already have standing maritime disputes with China, and India and US are looking to run capacity building programs in these countries, which would most likely focus on the defense sector and joint military training. Then along with this, the United States has also expressed concern about the lack of transparency with regard to the manner in which China deals with global affairs. This is possibly a reference to China's opaqueness with regard to sharing early information on the COVID-19 pandemic and how China failed to prevent the global spread of the pandemic. So these outcomes of the 2+2 dialogue that are specific to China clearly shows that the national security interests of India and US are converging, especially with regard to the security threats posed by China. Apart from this focus on China, India and US have also focused upon promoting defense cooperation between the two countries at the 2+2 dialogue. So in this regard, India finally signed the BECA agreement, which happens to be the last of the 4 foundational agreements that was expected to be signed between India and the United States. In our yesterday's discussion, we spoke about the 4 foundational agreements in detail. So today, let's just talk about the BECA. BECA stands for Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement for Geospatial Intelligence. And the signing of this agreement will help India to get real-time access to American geospatial intelligence. See, geospatial intelligence is nothing but detailed maps and charts that are captured by various aerial platforms, including space-based assets such as satellites. So such geospatial data can be captured by satellites, drones, reconnaissance aircraft, aerostats, etc. This advanced geospatial data will help in further understanding the topography of a region, and this could be used to enhance the accuracy of automated systems and weapons such as missiles, armed drones, etc. Such advanced geospatial data will help in precise navigation of military platforms and in accurate targeting of weapons. So under the BECA agreement, both India and US agree to exchange geospatial information and provide real-time access to the armed forces of both the sides. And this will particularly help the Indian Armed Forces to make use of high-quality GPS data from the United States to accurately navigate India's missiles, drones, ships, aircraft, and other military platforms in order to hit the target with great accuracy. So the geospatial information that would be exchanged under BECA will help in improved navigation and targeting both on land and sea. And apart from these defense military applications, it would also be helpful in the civilian domain, especially with regard to search and rescue operations that are carried out during times of natural disasters. So with the signing of this agreement, India has signed all the 4 foundational agreements of the United States, and this is expected to significantly improve defense cooperation and interoperability between the armed forces of the two countries. Apart from BECA, India and US have signed 4 other key agreements, which includes the Agreement on Technical Cooperation in Earth Observation and Earth Sciences in order to promote ties between ISRO and NASA. Then another agreement has been signed to extend India-US cooperation with regard to the administration of the Global Center for Nuclear Energy Partnership that has been established on the outskirts of Delhi in Haryana in order to promote cooperation in the field of research and development in the civilian nuclear domain. This Global Center for Nuclear Energy Partnership was established by India with collaboration from the United States, and both the countries have agreed to further extend their collaboration in order to promote the peaceful usage of nuclear energy. Then an agreement has been signed for electronic exchange of customs data in order to speed up the import and export of goods between India and the US, and as well as to promote exchange of tax-related information. And finally, an agreement has been signed to promote cooperation in the field of traditional Indian medicines, and this comes as a boost for the Ayush stream of medicines. Then, as we discussed yesterday, India and US have agreed to increase the deployment of liaison officers in each other's critical defense establishments in order to promote greater exchange of defense information and defense cooperation. Now let's take up the next article. The Centre has notified a set of new land laws for Jammu and Kashmir. As part of the reorganization of the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, the Ministry of Home Affairs has notified the J&K Reorganization Third Order of 2020, which repeals around 11 land laws that were earlier passed by the J&K Legislative Assembly. These changes being made to land laws will allow outsiders, that is the non-permanent residents of Jammu and Kashmir, to buy land and property in the Union Territory. So this right to purchase property in J&K would be available to individuals as long as they are Indian citizens and as well as to private investors. Earlier, the right to purchase land in Jammu and Kashmir was exclusive to the local population that was defined as the permanent residents of the state. These special privileges were guaranteed to the local population under the provisions of Article 370 and Article 35A of the Indian Constitution. Article 35A provided the J&K government and the J&K Legislative Assembly to define who are the permanent residents of the state, and in combination with Article 370, they would enjoy a special set of privileges. These special privileges to the people of Jammu and Kashmir was guaranteed under the constitution, considering the difficult circumstances in which the state became an integral part of India. But however, the current government had labelled Article 370 and Article 35A as discriminatory in nature, and it considered these provisions to be hampering the development of Jammu and Kashmir. So last year, in a controversial move, the government repealed the special status that Jammu and Kashmir enjoyed under Article 370 and Article 35A. And along with this, it introduced the J&K Reorganization Act, which downgraded Jammu and Kashmir from a state and broke the state into two union territories, that is the Union Territory of J&K and the Union Territory of Ladakh. Under the previous constitutional provisions, outsiders were not allowed to purchase land in Jammu and Kashmir, and this exclusive right was given only to the permanent residents of the state. But as a part of the ongoing constitutional and legal changes being introduced by the centre, the J&K Development Act has been introduced, which completely omits the term permanent resident. So as a result of these changes, any individual who is an Indian citizen and private investors in the country, they would be allowed to purchase land and property in Jammu and Kashmir even though they are outsiders. And the government expects that this move would promote industrial development and economic development in Jammu and Kashmir. Very soon, a similar set of laws shall be notified for the Union Territory of Ladakh as well. Then under the new land laws, the usage of agricultural land for non-agricultural purposes has been prohibited. This will basically protect the interests of the farmers, and it will ensure that the industry and the rich cannot force the farmers to sell their agricultural land for non-agricultural purposes. If any such change in the usage of land has to be allowed, then it has to be approved by the district magistrate or the district collector. Then, keeping the interests of the armed forces in mind, the new laws allows an army officer not below the rank of corps commander to declare any area as a strategic area, primarily for operational and training requirements of the armed forces. And once an area has been declared as a strategic area, the sale and purchase of land in and around it would be regulated by the state. But however, the opposition parties in Jammu and Kashmir have opposed these changes, and they have termed them as unconstitutional because according to them, the new land laws violate the rights that were guaranteed to the people of Jammu and Kashmir under the special provisions of the Indian Constitution, that is under Article 370 and Article 35A. Now let's take up an editorial from page number 6 that deals with a loan moratorium that was announced by the centre in order to provide relief to the borrowers who were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. Under this moratorium, the centre had announced that borrowers, that is retail borrowers, and even institutional borrowers such as MSMEs, could defer the repayment of their loans by 6 months between the 1st of March and the 31st of August. This was supposed to provide relief to the borrowers who were not in a position to make their repayments on time as a result of the difficulties caused by the pandemic and the lockdown. So accordingly, the centre directed the banks to provide this loan moratorium option to their borrowers. But however, the banks and the central government clarified that they would be charging interest on interest during this entire period when the loan moratorium would be applicable. It basically meant that the banks would continue to charge compound interest on simple interest, thereby essentially increasing the burden on the borrower. So it was basically just a deferment on the repayment of loans that was being provided by the centre, and it did not amount to any substantial benefit for the borrowers. So considering the financial burden of paying interest on interest, a number of customers had approached the Supreme Court. And while looking into this case, the Supreme Court criticized the central government for its insensitive approach. So following this reprimand from the Supreme Court, the central government has finally directed the banks to refund the difference between compound interest and simple interest on all retail loans and MSME loans. This, however, would be subject to the eligibility criteria, and it would apply for all borrowings that are less than 2 crore rupees. So the centre has directed the banks to complete this refund by the 5th of November, and banks now have the responsibility for picking out all the eligible beneficiaries who had availed retail loans such as education loans, housing loans, loans for consumer durables, automobiles, credit card bills, etc. So this decision of the centre to refund the additional interest collected by the banks is expected to bring relief to the retail borrowers, and this benefit shall be available to all the borrowers and not just to those who had opted for the loan moratorium. So even those retail borrowers who were promptly paying their EMIs during the lockdown period, even they will stand to benefit out of this scheme. And this will definitely bring a lot of relief to a number of retail borrowers. Then the refund that would be provided to MSMEs would also definitely bring financial relief to MSMEs. But however, the editorial argues that this measure alone is not sufficient to revive the MSME sector, because MSMEs in India have been severely hit by the pandemic and the lockdown. The pandemic has caused a major disruption to demand in the market, and the lockdown had disrupted the supply of even basic essentials such as raw materials. And the subsequent migrant crisis has caused a severe labor shortage, which has severely affected the performance of several MSMEs in India. So in this context, the editorial is making a case for greater support to be provided to the MSME sector, and it is asking the government to not worry about its fiscal deficit as of now, because any such support to the MSME sector will bring in a number of other tangential benefits as well, because the MSME sector generates huge employment both directly and indirectly, and it also makes a significant contribution to the government's tax revenue. So by keeping this cyclical role of MSMEs in promoting economic development, the editorial calls for greater government support to MSMEs which have been affected by the pandemic and the lockdown. But it does appreciate the waiver of interest on interest, which is expected to bring relief to retail borrowers and as well as to MSMEs. Now let's take up a column from page number 7 that deals with India's relations with Myanmar. See, India's ties with Myanmar is very critical, primarily because of its strategic location. Geographically, Myanmar functions as a land bridge to connect the South Asia region with Southeast Asia. And this makes Myanmar very critical for India, because India not only shares an immediate border with Myanmar, but it also shares a maritime border in the Bay of Bengal. So as India's immediate neighbor, the neighborhood first policy of India becomes applicable to Myanmar, and as a Southeast Asian country, the Act East policy of India also becomes applicable to Myanmar. So Myanmar is the only country where both the neighborhood first policy and the Act East policy are applicable. So this column has been published in the context of the upcoming elections in Myanmar. Just a few weeks before Myanmar goes into elections, India's Foreign Secretary and India's Chief of Army Staff paid a high-level visit to Myanmar, and this clearly underlines the significance that India attaches to building political ties with Myanmar. India's focus in Myanmar has always been on engaging with all the key political actors in order to keep away the dominant influence of China and balance its ties with the neighboring countries. Right now, India's top political priority in Myanmar is to support the ongoing democratization process, and this explains the high-level visits from India to Myanmar right before elections. Because see, for several decades, Myanmar was under a military dictatorship which was referred to as the military junta. Through the 1990s, the hold of the military junta increased, and it stamped out the pro-democracy movement led by Aung San Suu Kyi, and Myanmar continued to remain under military rule until 2010. So during this period, when the military junta was in power, India cultivated a very unique policy towards Myanmar. Despite being a democracy itself, India never pushed Myanmar to adopt democracy, and it never publicly criticized Myanmar for allegations of human rights violations under the military junta. Whereas the Western countries, led by the United States, they always took a hostile approach towards Myanmar because they saw Myanmar as an ally of China, and in order to weaken the military rule, they had even imposed stringent economic sanctions against Myanmar. So despite the pressure being put on India by the Western countries to push Myanmar towards the adoption of democracy, India resisted this Western pressure, and it said that it respects the political system in Myanmar, and India always extended support only for organic reforms that would genuinely take root within Myanmar itself. So essentially, India never believed in the external imposition of democracy on Myanmar, and this pragmatic and realistic policy of India was primarily driven by the dominant influence of China in Myanmar. Because between the 1960s and 1990s, China was known to actively support a number of Northeast insurgent outfits, and these insurgent groups, especially the Naga groups like NSCN, ULFA, and other Northeast militant organizations, they had established a safe haven in neighboring Myanmar by exploiting the densely forested and porous border between India and Myanmar. So by keeping these security concerns in mind, India always cultivated a very pragmatic and realistic policy towards Myanmar. And hence, in order to counterbalance China, India always resisted pressure from the Western countries when it came to imposing democracy on Myanmar. But under the pressure of Western sanctions, Myanmar's military junta slowly started making a transition towards democracy from 2010 onwards. So when a partial form of democracy was introduced in 2010, India was very supportive of Myanmar, and later in 2015, when it completely transitioned into a full-fledged democracy, India was very supportive and welcoming of these transitions that were taking place in Myanmar. So with Myanmar transitioning to a democracy, Western sanctions were removed, and this opened up Myanmar for commercial exploitation. So today, we are witnessing a geopolitical competition between major powers who are seeking to extend their influence in Myanmar, and this includes traditional powers such as India and China as well. On the subjects of insurgency and ethnic violence in Myanmar, infrastructure and commercial projects, and as well as on the Rohingya issue, India and China usually find themselves at conflicting positions, and both the countries are competing for influence in the country. In order to establish itself as a major power in Myanmar, India has taken up a unique diplomatic outreach towards Myanmar. The first focus of India has been on establishing good relations with all the key political actors in Myanmar, which includes not just the top military leadership, but also the top political leaders such as Aung San Suu Kyi. Then India has also invested in a number of strategic projects such as the Kaladan Multimodal Transit Transport Corridor project. Under the Kaladan project, India plans to connect the port at Kolkata with the Sittwe port of Myanmar, where India has invested. And from here, the project makes use of the Kaladan river in Myanmar to connect with the northeast of India. So this project basically brings India-Myanmar closer, and it also creates an alternative route for the northeast of India to connect with the rest of mainland India. It also opens up the northeast market to the Southeast Asian economy, and it is one of the ambitious projects that India is very eager to complete after the project faced a number of delays. The delays has been largely because of India's failure to execute and complete the project on time, and such failed promises on India's part has also affected India's image in Myanmar. Recently, India has proposed a massive investment of around $6 billion in Myanmar to jointly set up a petroleum refinery in order to exploit the oil and hydrocarbon potential of Myanmar. Along with this, both the countries are focused upon border management and border cooperation as well, because the presence of various insurgent groups along the India-Myanmar border affects both the countries. And along with this, since Myanmar is a part of the Golden Triangle region that includes Myanmar, Laos and Thailand, it is a hub of various organized criminal activities such as drug trafficking, arms trafficking, etc. So the presence of insurgent groups and the presence of several organized criminal gangs poses a major challenge with regard to border management, and hence close cooperation is required between India and Myanmar to tackle these border issues. Then upon this, we have the Rohingya crisis, which has been mainly perpetuated by Myanmar's army and the radical Buddhists in Myanmar, and their selective targeting of innocent Rohingya Muslims in the Rakhine state of Myanmar has perpetuated one of the worst humanitarian disasters in the region. The government in Myanmar has rendered the Rohingya stateless by denying them citizenship rights, because Myanmar believes that Rohingyas are the responsibility of neighboring Bangladesh. Say historically, the Rohingyas were a merchant community from the Chittagong and Cox's Bazar area of today's Bangladesh. But over the years, they had migrated to the Rakhine state of Myanmar and they had settled over here. Post-independence, Myanmar's army pursued a policy of discrimination against the Rohingyas, and this eventually turned into ethnic and communal discrimination, which has directly contributed to riots and violence in the region. So naturally, the Rohingya issue creates a dispute between Myanmar and Bangladesh, and India has always found it difficult to strike a balance on the Rohingya issue, because any decision of India is going to impact its ties either with Myanmar or with Bangladesh. Traditionally, India was welcoming of Rohingya refugees, but of late, India has taken a firm stand against the Rohingya refugees. But when it comes to resolving the dispute between Myanmar and Bangladesh, India has tried to strike a balance by understanding that the Rohingya refugees can be a burden on Bangladesh, and hence it has been encouraging the slow return of the Rohingyas back to Myanmar. But however, all the while, India never criticized Myanmar publicly in the interest of not affecting its ties with the key political players in Myanmar. Because any adverse reactions from India would conveniently push Myanmar into the hands of China, and since many decades, India has been striving to prevent this possibility. It is this factor which has also pushed India to cultivate very close defense relations with Myanmar. This can be seen from the fact that recently India has agreed to sell a submarine to Myanmar to strengthen its navy. And since many decades, Indian armed forces have been closely involved in training the security forces of Myanmar along with providing them with the required weapons. India also conducts a number of joint exercises and joint operations with the Myanmar armed forces, including the most recent Operation Sunrise, which was designed to target the several insurgent outfits that are operating along the India-Myanmar border. India has even extended technical assistance to Myanmar, such as hydrographic surveys, which helps in mapping out the terrain of the sea floor, and these maps are very critical for the deployment of submarines and as well as to identify the presence of marine resources. So this essentially explains India's unique outreach towards Myanmar, and if India has to take this relationship further, then India will have to fulfill its commitments to Myanmar. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. Which of the following statements are correct? The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of 1967 is India's primary law to deal with acts of terrorism. Under the Act, only organizations can be designated as terrorist outfits. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is correct, but the second statement is incorrect. Because just last year, the UAPA was amended to allow the government to designate even individuals as terrorists. So the correct answer is option A, one only. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 9. According to this article, India has designated 18 terrorists based out of Pakistan under its Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of 1967. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following are the features of the PM Swanidhi scheme? It provides affordable working capital loan to street vendors to resume their livelihoods that have been adversely affected by the COVID-19 lockdown. It was launched as a part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. It is implemented by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. All the three statements are correct, so option D is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 10, the Prime Minister has praised the street vendors who have been making timely repayments of the loans that they had availed under the Pradhan Mantri Street Vendors Atmanirbhar Nidhi or PM Swanidhi. This scheme was launched to provide collateral-free loans to street vendors of up to 10,000 rupees in order to help them overcome the impact of the pandemic and the lockdown. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Harpoon missile is primarily an anti-ship missile. It can be launched from fixed-wing aircraft, surface ships, submarines and coastal defense batteries. It has been indigenously developed for the Indian Navy. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect, so option B is the right answer. See, the Harpoon missile has been developed by the United States and India has procured it for deployment on the P-8I Poseidon aircraft that India has procured from the US in order to target any hostile ships in the Indian Ocean region. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 13, the United States is looking to sell around $2.4 billion worth of defense systems to Taiwan. As a part of this deal, the US has approved the sale of around 100 Harpoon coastal defense systems to Taiwan, and this has angered China as it always claims sovereignty over Taiwan as a part of its One China policy. But due to rising tensions between US and China, the United States has been openly challenging the One China policy, and it has been assisting Taiwan through diplomatic and military support in order to challenge Chinese claims. Now let's take up the next question. The Annual State Finances, a Study of Budgets report is brought out by the Reserve Bank of India. Option B is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 14 which makes a reference to this report published by the RBI. According to this report, the fiscal position of a number of states is going to erode in the coming years as a result of the pandemic and the impact of the lockdown. So the report expects the gross fiscal deficit of states to increase in the coming years in breach of their obligations under the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. Now let's take up a question from the 2018 prelims paper. Consider the following statements. The definition of critical wildlife habitat is incorporated in the Forest Rights Act of 2006. For the first time in India, Baigas have been given habitat rights. Union Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change officially decides and declares habitat rights for primitive and vulnerable tribal groups in any part of India. Amongst the given statements, the third statement is incorrect, so option A is the right answer. Because habitat rights are declared by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, not by the Ministry of Environment. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, discuss in detail the outcomes of the latest India-US 2+2 ministerial dialogue. The second question, evaluate the impact of the new land laws in Jammu and Kashmir. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.